Storyteller's Thread, a monthly podcast devoted to young adult literature and the art of storytelling. I'm your host, Sean Connors. On each episode, we invite an author for young adults to take us inside their work, and in doing so, to talk about their writing process, their inspiration for writing for young readers, and the general ins and outs of earning a living as a professional storyteller. So, whether you're a compulsive reader, an aspiring writer, a teacher or librarian, or simply a frustrated reader who's counting the hours until you get home and dive back into that novel that's waiting for you on your nightstand, this is the place for you. Hey everyone, it's August 1st, and I'm your host, Sean Connors. Well, the dog days of summer are officially upon us. I hope summer's been good to you and that you found time to get outdoors and do whatever it is that makes you happy. Man, with all that's been going on in the world these past few weeks, I think we could all use a little bit of happy right about now, don't you? I'm personally gearing up to get away here soon and do some backpacking and fishing, which is like the equivalent of a year's worth of meditation for me. So when you next hear from me, I hope to feel re-energized myself. This month I'm talking with Jerry Craft, whose breakout graphic novel New Kid hit bookstore shelves this past February. As you'll probably gather from our conversation, Jerry may well be one of the hardest working people in comics today, and New Kid is a book that's deservedly garnering a lot of attention. As someone who reads more than my fair share of comics, I can tell you it's one of the most enjoyable graphic novels for young readers that I've read in a while, and I highly recommend it. Before we go any further, I want to make my customary pitch and just say that if you enjoy this podcast and feel like you can comfortably recommend it to others, I'd appreciate your doing so. And thank you also for taking time to listen. Over the course of the past year, I've discovered that there's actually a lot that goes into producing a podcast, more than you might think. And the fact that people are coming back each month makes all the work worthwhile. All right, let's get into my conversation with Jerry. I hope that you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed talking with him. The critical and commercial success that Jerry Craft's graphic novel New Kid has enjoyed may have heightened his visibility to educators, but the author and illustrator has enjoyed a long, successful career in comics that predates the book's February 2019 publication. Born in Harlem and raised in nearby Washington Heights, Craft attended New York City's School of Visual Arts, where he earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in advertising. After working in the ad world for 12 years, he caught his first break as a professional cartoonist when Barbara Slate took him on as an assistant. He would continue to hone his storytelling skills as the creator of Mama's Boys, an award-winning comic strip about Pauline Porter, an African-American widow raising two teenage sons while juggling the challenges of running a family bookstore. King Feature Syndicate distributed Mama's Boys between 1995 and 2013, establishing Craft as one of a small number of syndicated African-American cartoonists in the U.S. Today, he's an advocate for other Black writers and artists, both in his role as a co-founder of the Black Comic Book Festival, which is held annually at the Schomburg Center in Harlem, and as a contributor to the Brown Bookshelf, a nonprofit group that promotes the voices of Black authors and illustrators producing books for young readers. As a young person growing up in New York City, Craft traveled between two worlds: his predominantly African-American community in Washington Heights, and Riverdale, an affluent neighborhood in the Bronx, where he attended a private, predominantly white school. That experience serves as the basis for New Kid, which tells the story of 7th grader Jordan Banks, whose parents, seeking to prepare their son to navigate white society as a person of color, send him to a private school with a reputation for strong academics. By allowing readers to accompany Jordan on his journey across these socioeconomically and racially segregated communities, New Kid calls attention to the complex, often subtle ways in which racism and classism operate in American society. Booklist has called New Kid possibly one of the most important graphic novels of the year, and Kirkus Reviews has described it as an engrossing, humorous, and vitally important graphic novel that should be required reading in every middle school in America. Despite a hectic travel schedule that has him talking with audiences around the world, Craft generously set aside time to talk with me about his work, and from his drawing board no less, where he sat working on a highly anticipated sequel to New Kid. You were born in Harlem and you grew up in nearby Washington Heights. As a child, did you know that you wanted to be an artist?
Yeah, that is like the first and only thing that I think I ever wanted to be.
Really?
Yeah, there was never any doubt. So I would draw. My dad would always give me crayons and things like that. And yeah, it really never wandered from that.
The protagonist in your graphic novel New Kid, which you published just this past February, and which we'll talk about shortly, wants to go to art school, but his parents don't see that as a viable option, and they want him to attend a private school instead.
Mm-hmm.
To what extent is that an autobiographical detail? Were your parents supportive of your interest in art when you were growing up?
Not professionally. Like, as long as it was a hobby and it was cute and harmless, that's okay. But, literally the only I guess, adjective that they had ever heard associated with artists was starving. So no one really knew anything. We had, when I was a kid, we used to watch Bewitched. And, Darren was, I think he was in advertising. And that was really the only like real job that anyone really knew. So other than that, it was, being in Greenwich Village selling paintings on the sidewalk of like, bulldogs playing poker or something like that, or Elvis paintings. And so they were those are like the only two things. So it was like, yeah, he's an artist. He's going to be living with us until he's 50. So I had taken a test for music and art design, both art high schools in New York City. I passed them both and wanted to go to one. And my parents were like, nah, I think we're going to go to Fieldston. So I really did go to a school in Riverdale. So all that stuff is highly autobiographical.
What was that experience like? Because for people who haven't read New Kid, you're essentially commuting between two very different cultures. Your neighborhood in Washington Heights and predominantly white affluent school in Riverdale.
Yeah.
And what was that experience like for you personally?
It was weird because growing up, I just wasn't really around that many white people. I lived in Washington Heights, and all of us, we were mainly African American, middle class African American, some Puerto Rican. There were some remnants of white families that had been there for 50 years and had just never moved out, but not a lot, but no kids, my schools, first grade through sixth grade, if there were 25 of us in the class, all 25 were African American. In seventh and eighth grade, it went from all 25 being African American to maybe 23 with one Latina and one, white kid. So that was all I ever knew. So my interaction with white kids was watching the Brady Bunch and the Partridge Family and that kind of stuff. So to go from a really tiny school, like, each class was 25 kids. So my graduating class in eighth grade at St. Matthew's in Inwood was 25 kids. And now all of a sudden, the very next year, I'm at Fieldston with a ninth grade class is like 110 kids, of which maybe 10 of us were African American. And maybe half of those kids were black kids that had been in Fieldston their entire school life, like since, first grade. So we had nothing in common at all. So it was not only my first time being around white kids, but my first time being around black kids that I had nothing in common with. So it was interesting to say the least.
I want to come back to your interest in art for a moment.
Yeah.
Did you ever personally experience feelings of doubt or question the feasibility of your earning a living as an artist?
Yeah, up until maybe 4 months ago.
Okay, that's fair.
But you know what? So I always had full-time jobs. So I graduated from School of Visual Arts in New York City, and I got my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. But the weird thing is, the cartooning classes filled up so quickly because, they had legendary teachers like Harvey Kurtzman and Will Eisner.
Mm.
So I could never actually get into one of the cartooning classes. So I ended up majoring in advertising. And then my senior year, I had to pick, more specific majors. So I became an advertising copywriter because there were some amazing artists there. But I knew I was a pretty good writer, but I positioned myself as a really good writer who could draw better than the other writers, as opposed to a really good artist because there were some exceptional artists. So, yeah, I'm going to be a writer who draws really well. So I get that like double whammy. And so my first jobs were in advertising, as a copywriter, where I wrote radio commercials and some smaller TV commercials and print ads and things like that. And then the ad business just completely imploded in the 90s. And I ended up, working with a woman named Barbara Slate, who, she's an artist, a comic artist. And I remember going to the placement office at, School of Visual Arts, and they're like, hey, there's this woman who's looking for an assistant, an art assistant. I was like, oh my goodness, that's great. And she's doing something for Marvel? I'm like, yes, I finally get to do Spider-Man, because that was my big thing. And I called her up. She's like, yeah, I'm doing a book called Sweet 16, which is kind of like Archie in ancient Rome. And I was like, Archie? Oh. But, I needed the job. So I said, okay. So I spent the weekend going through my sister's Archie comics, and I made a whole new portfolio. And I went Monday morning and got the job. And so that was how I became Barbara Slate's assistant. And she had done a series called Angel Love before me, which is groundbreaking. So she had done Yuppies from Hell, which is a graphic novel. So I did backgrounds on that, as well as Sweet 16. And then we did some New Kids on the Block. So those are my first actual printed samples.
So when you were working in advertising, were you doing creative projects on the side?
Yeah, I always did. I had a comic strip called Mama's Boys.
Okay.
That I did. So I always did that on the side. And then, sometimes I would get freelance stuff. When I worked with Barbara, I still did Mama's Boys, and I had submitted it to King Features Syndicate to try to get syndicated. And I didn't get that, but I ended up being offered an internship there. So then I did 1 day a week at King Features and 3 days a week with Barbara. And the good thing with that is I got to meet, big time cartoonists. I got to meet Ray Billingsley, who did Curtis, Lee Falk, who did Phantom, and Marvin, and we had, Beetle Bailey. So I met, Mort Walker. So that was when I really started to polish my Mama's Boys comic strip.
What did you learn working with Barbara about making comics that allowed you to grow as a storyteller?
Well, she's really good visually. Her stories are good too, but she, specifically with me, she taught me the visual aspect of not having the talking heads, because you would see so many comic books even now where it's just headshots, talk, no angles, no close-ups, no establishing shots, those kind of things. And I always felt like she did really, really good characters. In fact, she has a book out now called You Can Do a Graphic Novel, which is really helpful, even at my level now, but it's good to go back with, oh yeah, I remember when she taught me this, so, those are the kind of things that really help kind of take me to the next level.
So I want to talk a little bit about Mama's Boys, which, correct me on the dates if I'm wrong, but you drew between 1995 and 2003. thereabouts?
Yeah, something like that. I think I created it in 1992, and I think it got picked up weekly by King Features in 95, and then I self-published my first Mama's Boys book in 97. So I think that's it.
For listeners who aren't familiar with the strip, could you introduce the characters and maybe talk a little bit about the terrain it covered?
Yeah, so, I always just wanted to do stories with African American kids as regular kids. And so in this, it's a mom raising her two teenage sons, and the mom owned an indie bookstore, and the boys, were in high school, and, there was nothing bad. They worked at the bookstore, they played video games, they played basketball, just like regular stuff. Like there was no drugs, there's no gangs. So I've always been very, big on trying to do just regular stories as opposed to, having characters where something miserable has to happen and they're wallowing in pain and misery and suffering, and like that's the only Black experience. So I just wanted to do that. And, at the bookstore, and then it was interesting because, one day I got a newsletter about how diabetes was running rampant in the African American and Latinx community. And I wrote to the American Diabetes Association. I said, hey, maybe we could do some stuff together with the characters. And they were like, yeah, that would be awesome. So what we ended up doing was using the characters as spokes characters for the American Diabetes Association's African American program. So that was my first time of really doing like serious stuff in cartoon form. Talked about diabetes and diet and things like that. And then years later, I got a call from the New York Daily News asking if I wanted to do some Mama's Boys comics for their AIDS supplement. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, how am I going to do a comic strip about AIDS? And I thought about it. And then I came up with some concepts, and I ended up doing that for maybe 6 months. It came out like quarterly. So yeah, I guess maybe 2 years or something like that. And then little by little, I kind of became known as the guy that could take serious subjects and make them palatable and digestible so that it was explained without lecturing and things like that. I did stuff for organ and tissue donation. I did stuff with the American Council of Fitness and Nutrition to battle childhood obesity. And so that really became my niche of taking serious subjects and making them easy to read, without scaring people off.
And with the humor.
With humor, absolutely.
Like that's been an element of your work, is that you're able to take these serious issues. And I think you also, didn't you address teen pregnancy?
Yep. Yep.
I think leukemia at one point.
Yeah.
So you're taking these serious topics, but you're using humor as a vehicle to present and to deal with them as well.
Right. Because I know when the American Diabetes Association was, they would do booklets, or pamphlets, and, the headline would be like, you're going to lose your foot, or something like that. And, people were scared to death to read that, because even if you have symptoms, it's human nature not to really always want to confront that stuff. So I did it in a way that, you could say, hey, listen, if you have these symptoms, and then maybe like something humorous to bring them in. And then once it was in, I could, get with the more serious subject matter. And I think over years, I really started to specialize in that kind of stuff. So when we start talking about New Kid, by the time we got that, like something like race, that was easy. I'm like, oh yeah, I could do this in my sleep.
Let me ask you a broad question here. And if you need to take a moment to reflect on it, please do.
Okay. Yep.
How would you describe your vision as a creator? At the end of the day, what is Jerry Craft aspiring to do or to accomplish through his work?
So I grew up in an not era, era of like Fat Albert, which, I know we're not supposed to talk about anymore, but at that time, Fat Albert was like a big thing. And everything was a teaching experience, like so many of the cartoons gave morals and life lessons. And then when in between the cartoons, you had Schoolhouse Rock and Multiplication Rock. And then there was Time for Timer where he came on and talked about healthy snacks. And, then there was Sesame Street and the Electric Company and Zoom. And so I never saw a difference between teaching and entertaining, so those things really shaped what I became, so there is almost nothing that I do that doesn't have some kind of moral aspect or family values or how to treat people or, I did a book about bullying, so those kind of things. So I think when you get a Jerry Craft book, you will learn some stuff. There may be stuff where I may call you out on some stuff to get us all to be better, but you won't be offended. You won't feel picked on. And hopefully it will inspire you to step it up a notch. If you're a kid, if you're a teacher, anything like that.
In preparing for our conversation, I watched an interview that you gave, and there was something in it that you said that I thought was truly remarkable. In the interview, you said that you were unwilling to stray from your artistic vision, even if that meant not getting published.
Right.
And as you mentioned earlier, you've self-published a number of books, including collections of your Mama's Boy strips.
Right.
To what extent was your foray into self-publishing motivated by your struggling to find a place for your vision in the mainstream publishing industry?
So, I never wanted to do books on slavery, civil rights. I mean, there are some amazing books that cover that. And, for the people that want to do that, that is all them and, we're better off for it. But I do think that just as important, to have a Black kid that does what Harry Potter does, or Percy Jackson or Dogman or, the Raina Telgemeier books. And I remember sending some stuff out and I got rejection letter after rejection letter after rejection letter. And then one letter in particular, someone had taken the time to put a handwritten note. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Someone is taking extra time to tell me something special. I was like, that is so amazing. And I read the note and it was like, we're not interested in this good time style of Black sitcom humor. And it was like,
are you serious?
Yeah. I was like, holy moly. I was like, the concept that whoever this person was got like really angry by what I sent them. And, there are different nuances in comedy. Like there was a difference between, say, the writing in, say, Seinfeld and Gilligan's Island, or Curb Your Enthusiasm and Gilligan's Island. And the fact that they couldn't differentiate what I was trying to do with like Good Times, which was, mainly like insult oriented and, oh, Thelma, you're so this and you're so ugly and you're so this. And for a show called Good Times, there really weren't ever any good times. It was just kind of blanketed to be like, hey, you know what? This is good times for you. For anyone that looks like you, this is as good as it's going to get. So don't complain. So I was so like offended that, it's like one thing getting a form letter, but like who takes their time to like specifically be nasty? And it was literally then that I gave up on the concept of being traditionally published. So I went to the library, which I've always loved libraries once I got older, because I wasn't reading as a kid. So libraries were not a fun place for me as a kid. But as I got older, I went to the library. I found a book on self-publishing, and I started my own publishing company, and I published my first Mama's Boys book in 1997. And, I, over the last 20 years, published or helped other people to publish maybe 30 books or so, without looking back.
How did if you don't mind my asking, how did the opportunity to publish New Kid through a major publishing house came about? Was New Kid a project that you'd been working on and completed and shopped around, or was it something that someone reached out to you to do?
Well, I had the concept, and I figured I would have to self-publish that as well. But the only thing is, for it to be a big graphic novel, I needed to find out how to print it economically, because I knew that I could not afford to print a 100 or 200 page graphic novel in color, and I didn't want it to be in black and white. So it was on the back burner cooking as I tried to find out what to do. And then, one day I was like, I'm getting older here, and this self-publishing thing is getting kind of tough, because I had to constantly be working on the book. And it's not like I ever got like royalties or anything like that, even when I did books for other people. So I just really needed to always be, 110%, just moving. And then I had to be selling. So I always had to do like book fairs, because that was my income. So I reached out to a woman I knew that had some contacts in the publishing world. And I was like, listen, I need some introductions. So she gave me a virtual introduction to 3 editors. And I sent out query letters, and he's like, oh yeah, thanks, but no thanks. I'm like, okay. And then I got called in to have a meeting at Scholastic. And I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. And while I was there, I pitched the concept for New Kid. And then I ended up doing a book for them that I illustrated called the 0 Degree Zombie Zone. Mm-hmm. So that was the first traditionally published book that I did, especially for, someone major like Scholastic. And so while I was doing that, I was also working on, the idea for New Kid. And then because I had the published book and had some interest in them, I was able to leverage getting like an agent. And then from there, we took it, and once I did up some samples, had some interest in it, and, through like a long road, ended up with HarperCollins, which has been like a pretty amazing ride.
And I'm so glad you did, because it's a fantastic book. I mean, I loved reading that book, and I've been telling anybody who will listen that they need to check this book out. So I'd like to talk a little bit about New Kid.
Sure.
For listeners who haven't read it, can you give them a sense of what the book's about and who the principal characters are?
All right. So it's loosely based on my 4 years of going to Fieldston in Riverdale. So I did grow up in Washington Heights, much like the protagonist, Jordan Banks, who is starting 7th grade, and he wants to go to art school. And like me, parents did not want him to be an artist. So they end up sending him to this ritzy private school in the Riverdale section of New York City. So that is all based on my life. Now, when I had sons, well, I still have them. Yeah, that's on the past. And we kept them. They were well behaved, so we kept them. When I had sons, we ended up, both my wife and I were private school kids. So we ended up sending them to a private school. And by then I was living in Connecticut. So we ended up sending them to a school in New Canaan, Connecticut, and New Canaan is equally, if not more, let's say upscale than Riverdale. So I got to see it also from my son's point of view, and they went, beginner C all the way through ninth grade. So I got 12 years of seeing a lot of, the microaggressions and nuances and things like that come with being one of the few kids of color in a predominantly white setting.
New Kid is very much a book about prejudice and racism as they present themselves in everyday, polite society.
Right.
And throughout the story, Jordan and his friends of color are subject to, and I'll use the term you used, a series of microaggressions. So you have a white teacher who repeatedly calls one of Jordan's black classmates by the wrong name, mistaking him for another student. A white student persists in asking another classmate questions about Mexican dishes that his mom prepares at home, despite the fact that he's been told repeatedly that the boy is in fact Nicaraguan.
Right.
Can you talk about your motivation for telling a story that explores the less obvious, more subtle ways in which racism operates?
So, I tried to address race and class because it was interesting that in Fieldston, there were 5 of us who are African American, who had similar backgrounds. And so we were like best friends. But then the other kids, like I said, it wasn't every black kid automatically became our friends because we had such differences, the ones that had been in Fieldston the whole time. So some of the kids, the white kids were middle class like us. So we got along better with them. So that was one aspect where class basically overshadowed race, so we had those kind of things in common. So, when we came back from spring break, we didn't go to the Cayman Islands like some of the kids in class. We went to Coney Island, and so it was nice to be around other kids that, that weren't being picked up with limos or, chauffeurs or diplomatic license plates and things like that. So there was a real comfort zone with that. I wanted to do something because I know that there are some people that read it initially like, well, it was good, but nothing happened. I'm like, yeah, plenty happens, but I didn't want it to be, I think a lot of times we're brainwashed in the setting that when there are kids of color, especially black kids, that something traumatic has to happen in order for it to be a story. And I didn't want a big thing to happen. I wanted it to be like, when they talk about death by 1,000 paper cuts or something like that, or just a constant like poke, 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 So that was kind of what I wanted to do. And also to show like some things that we can do better. So, for example, as a friend, if I am Japanese, take 2 seconds to realize I am Japanese, not Chinese. And don't talk to me about, does your mom make egg rolls or does she do this or does she do that? So I just wanted to give those kind of things. I wanted teachers to be able to realize that, depending where a black kid is from, like me and my friend, there really is a difference. And you can't say we're not different. And sometimes we need a little different viewpoint when you're addressing us. And librarians that don't think that every black kid that comes in wants to read a book like the fictional book that I made up was the Mean Streets of South Uptown, which is just like, misery and gangs and drugs and, everything that people think that, black kids can relate to. And it's like, you know what? I don't know anything about gang life,
I came across an interview that you gave in which you were quoted as saying that in drawing New Kid, you wanted to give, and I'm quoting you here, to give every type of African American the right to exist simultaneously in the book.
Yep.
I loved that quote. Can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, because, when I see things that have different types of African Americans, there's usually one way that's right and one way that's wrong. And there is the whole thing of like, if you speak a certain way, are you black enough or you're not really black or those kind of things. Like in a lot of movies that feature white characters, the villains in that are really over the top villains. You can tell that they're a bad guy. In a lot of black movies, the villains are just a black guy that got a promotion and he's got a good job, and because what they do is they show that anytime you get a good job, then, you forget your friends and you forget your family and you become this monster. And I think what that does is just kind of put it in our minds like, oh, well, we can't do that because we're selling out. So I wanted a character like Maury who grew up in that Riverdale lifestyle to be able to exist without mocking him. I wanted Jordan, who's middle class, lives in a brownstone, educated. So yeah, he may talk like a white kid according to friends around his block. But then I also wanted to show that, the kids around his block may not have the opportunity to have the education that Jordan has. But when you hear like their sense of humor and, their quips and stuff like that and what they talk about, that they're still smart kids. They just didn't have the opportunity to have the education that some of these other kids did. So I didn't want to have anyone being wrong and being like, okay, you're not the type of black kid that, is supposed to exist, because we can all exist.
Just as the relationships between Jordan and his classmates are characterized by microaggressions, I found it interesting that the relationships between teachers are as well. As an example, for people who haven't read the book yet, there's a scene where a white teacher mistakes an African American teacher who had been at the school for like 14 years for a coach, right?
Right.
Can you talk about your decision to represent teachers in the way that you did in New Kid, and what understandings you hope teachers might take away from reading this graphic novel?
Yeah, again, I wanted to show that, especially when you have the power of a teacher, because, teachers are what keeps the generations going. I can't say enough great things about teachers. They're like the lifeblood of society, that molds future generations. And I just want them to be aware of the power that they have. So I know in my son's school that would happen all the time, that they would confuse the black teachers, and like, hey, so-and-so, like, no, I'm not him. I'm the other one, even though he's 6 foot tall and I'm 5'6", and he's, this and I'm that. And, kids see that. I know one time my son, I think in one of the newsletters, they put one of the other black kids' names under his name, or vice versa. They either had my son's picture with another black kid's name or vice versa. And, sometimes it can be seen as not caring. Like if I look at you and say, hey, Sean, I've never liked any shirt you've ever worn. At least I've noticed, yes, it's an insult, but at least I've taken the time to notice how you dress and notice you, to criticize you. But if after 14 years, I'm still like spelling your name Shawn and I'm supposed to be a friend of yours, you're like, dude, I'm Sean. Can you just take 2 minutes to, respect that and learn to, dude, like I'm your friend, like help me out here. So I wanted to do those kind of things where you just take that extra minute of recognition and give, like just the proper respect that we all deserve.
And then on the other side of the continuum, I love the character of Mr. Roach,
Right.
Jordan's white science teacher and soccer coach, who's perpetually apologizing throughout the book for fear that he might have said something that someone could construe as culturally insensitive.
Right.
Can you talk about your decision to include him in the story?
You know what? Because when you talk about race and class, there definitely are some powder kegs that, if not handled correctly, could alienate people. And I definitely did not want to alienate any of my readers or teachers. And I have to say that, the response that I have gotten from teachers and librarians has been absolutely amazing, because I've gotten emails where like a librarian is like, you know what? It really made me do some serious soul searching to think about whether I only give Black kids those kind of books. And, I think I do. And I gotta check myself. I think I need to change that. I had one dad say that he read it with his kids and he's like, oh my God, I was Andy. I was the Andy character and he was a real jerk. So I read this with my kids because I want them to be a better human being than I was when I was in school. And this is a grown man. And I was like, holy moly, that is absolutely amazing. So to have like that kind of input, so because I did have a lot of, class and race stuff, there were things that I wanted to do that were just flat out silly. And it was very important for me to make you laugh at some point. So, Coach Roach with the donuts that he gives to the kids for playing soccer, like, hey, grab a donut for energy and go out there and run fast. I know you can run fast. I mean, not because you're, but because, listen, we're all created equal. I just want you to know that, just being so tense and wound up about, some of these things. But hopefully if you have said those kind of things that you're like, oh man, I did do that, but you can get a chuckle out of it as opposed to feeling like I'm calling you out, because if you are a teacher and you're dedicating your life to teaching kids, you've got my respect. So the last thing I would want to do is to do that kind of thing with any teacher or librarian, to be offensive.
And it comes back to what you do so well, I think, which is using humor as a vehicle to address these complex issues in nuanced ways, but that are approachable also for young readers.
And again, that comes from years of being pegged as the guy that takes these serious topics. And so I feel like in a lot of ways, everything I've ever done has led me to doing New Kid. It's all falling into place, in an amazing sort of way.
I was really fascinated by Jordan's dad.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really fascinated by the tension that both of Jordan's parents, but particularly his father, experience as a result of their decision to send Jordan to a predominantly white, affluent school. On the one hand, his father understands that the experience is going to benefit Jordan later in life because it'll prepare him to navigate the dominant culture. But at the same time, he's deeply concerned that he's going to lose his connections to Black culture. Can you talk about the tensions that come with having to make a decision of the sort that Jordan's parents face?
One of my good friends, Ruth Fieldston, had been there longer than me. And, his mom sent him to the school, but then they teased him for having white friends or a white girlfriend. And it's like, well, what do you expect? This is where you sent me. So, there is that kind of thing that, I just did TLA and ALA and there are thousands and thousands of people and there may be 5 other black men there, and all of them are authors. And I don't think that in general anyone realizes as a white person what it would be like to be one of 6 white people with 10,000 black people. Um, so I just wanted to kind of point that out. So like there was one when Jordan is arguing with his teacher and she's like, oh, well, you should be glad to be here, and I know you're different, but different is what makes you so special. And he's like, well, would you come to my school, like in my neighborhood and teach so you could be special? And so I just wanted to point out that, just think about it. Just think like if you're a woman to be at a school or workplace that is 95% male, or if you're male to think what it's like to be, 95% female, or, just different people fitting into different societies, cultures and things like that. So when it comes to sending a black kid to private school, there's so many things. First of all, there is the work because you are there to learn. So, I had to make sure that I was on par with the other kids, which I was by my grades going up to there. But, when all you see on TV is that the black kids are struggling and the white kids are all honor roll, you have some thoughts like, okay, am I going to be smart enough? What's it going to be like? Am I going to have friends? Are they going to think this? Am I going to be alienated? And that's a lot for a 12-year-old. And I don't think that people realize those other pressures. And then once you go back around the block, sometimes like, oh, hey, private school, you think you're all that now. You talk like a white kid now, or you do this, or you do that. So there are so many things. He's exhausted because of so much of the thought process that's bouncing off in his little head.
I talked to Varian Johnson
Mm-hmm.
for this podcast about his new book, The Parker Inheritance. And in the course of our conversation, he described The Parker Inheritance as a book that's very much about perception and how the assumptions that we make about other people influence our understanding of them. As I was reading New Kid this weekend, it occurred to me that the same could be said of your book. I wonder if you can talk about your motivation for exploring that theme, the notion that how we perceive others shapes the assumptions we make about them.
Yeah, I think specifically the character of Drew, I wanted to put him in where the teacher, Miss Roll, just assumes that he's a certain way because, she had another black student years before him who was kind of a handful in her words. So she had a bunch of preconceived notions about how he would be, but he was the complete opposite. He's really smart. He's on a roll, behaves, he listens, but she almost pushed him into her preconceived notion of what she thought he would be. And I see that a lot. Like I do school visits and sometimes I'll get there and the first thing, all right, now the class coming in, there's a kid named DeAndre and he's a handful. And I'll look and the kid will come up and he'll ask for an autograph and be very attentive and stuff. And it's like, all right, well, I think it's maybe just because, he is by himself. And if you don't know the way to talk sometimes and just different things like that, he's got a lot on his plate, and sometimes they'll, hey, Mr. Craft, how do you do this? Can I get one of your books? Can I do this? I'm like, well, wait a minute. You're supposed to be the problem kid that doesn't like to read. And you're the person up here and asking if you can take a look at the book or borrow it. And how can you get one? So I have seen a lot of those kids that, like I said, have these preconceived notions already. And then, again, at 12, 13, they're like, well, this is what they expect. Might as well give it to them because they don't have the wherewithal of the adult mind to have a conversation or to do, some of the things that they need to do in order to be treated the same.
I don't want to put you on the spot.
Oh, you've been putting me on the spot for 40 minutes, John.
True. You don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but I think it piggybacks on what you're explaining. You are really active on Twitter. And over the 4th of July holiday, you shared an experience that you and your son had that involved the very sort of issues that we're talking about right now, and the way that people's assumptions, the way we perceive others and the assumptions we make, creates our expectation, our reality for them. Would you mind sharing that story?
Well, you did your research, didn't you?
I did do my research.
Okay, so my son is 19. Like I said, he's been in private school his whole life. He's a freshman in college. He doesn't wear sagging pants, no tattoos. So just giving you the concept. Like, he's my complexion. We're light skinned, which I know does make a difference even with how people are perceived. And, that's just how it is. So he was going to a 4th of July party. And so I went with him, and he bought a red, white, and blue shirt. And this is at like a Bob's store, right? We have them here in Connecticut. And he bought this red, white, and blue shirt. And I'm with him. I'm a Bob's Rewards member, so I've been shopping at the store 15 years. So he waits up July 4th, and he comes down, and he's like, oh, man, Dad, they left the security tag on. He's like, oh, do you think they're open today? And I'm like, yeah, call them and find out. So he calls, and yep, they're open. So I'm going to go over there and have them take the tag off. And I'm like, no, you're not. I'm like, you're not going without me. Even though I'm cooking and getting ready for July 4th, I'm like, you're a black teenager going in to say that you have a security tag still on your thing. 9 times out of 10, they're going to assume that you stole it. And then I'm going to be looking for you, and then you'll be calling me up, Dad, I'm in the police station. So these are all things as a parent of a black young man, unfortunately, I have to process. So I get dressed. I'm like, okay, let's go. So we get there, and I have the shirt. I do all the talking. Okay. And now you hear how I speak, and you see my picture. So I don't think I'm threatening. I say, listen, I was with my son, and we bought this shirt, and it still has a security tag on. I said, you can pull up by my phone number, my Bob's Reward number, and I hope that you'll be able to see the purchase. All right. So I knew I had to say all of that to even start out with. So he's frowning. The guy takes the shirt, and he goes over the computer. What's your phone number? Okay, this isn't pleasant. Give him the phone number. Well, when did you buy the shirt? Like, doesn't it tell you? Like, doesn't it show my purchases? I'm like 2 weeks ago. And he's looking, and just frowning and grimacing the whole time. And finally he goes over, and he gets the machine, and he unhooks it and gives it back. And as we're walking out, well, next time bring your receipt. So now I turn around. I'm like, next time you should take the tag off like you're supposed to, but never once did he ever put himself in the mind of, what if they are telling the truth? There was no sorry for the inconvenience. We're so sorry that you had to come in on 4th of July. So really, like, we're, the father and son edition of Bonnie and Clyde. So we cased the place. We stole this $9 tank top as a team, because I taught my son well. So I distracted them. My son ran out. We stole this $9 tank top. And now we're going to bring it back on July 4th when everyone else is celebrating to have them remove the security tag from our stolen merchandise together.
That sounds like a stretch.
Yeah, like, really? So, but that's why I knew I had to go with my son in the first place, because if he were alone, he would have gotten worse than that, you know? So that's why I write books like New Kid.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, that's precisely why the book is so important. You've described New Kid as a book that you wished you'd had as a kid.
Right.
Can you talk about why that's the case?
Because I wasn't a reader. But you know what? Someone corrected me because I said I read Marvel Comics. Like, well, you were a reader. You just weren't a book reader. I'm like, oh yeah. Because, again, miserable stuff happens to people that look like me and my friends. I wasn't thrilled to read, Huckleberry Finn. Yes, people say it's a classic, but when the one character that, is one of my descendants, like that wasn't something I was rushing to read. But hey, I want to be like Jim when I grow older. So I just kind of skipped through all that and went to Spider-Man and, kind of related to them. And I didn't really see the power of books until I had my sons. And one day, like, Dad, you gotta take us to the store August 7th. I'm like, okay, what are you talking like? GameStop? Is the new, Mario Brothers coming out? No. The new Wimpy Kid is coming out. I'm like, ho, wait a minute. You mean to tell me you know when a book is coming out? Yeah. And I don't think I've ever used the word flabbergasted. I was flabbergasted. I'm like, you know when a book is coming out? And they would get Wimpy Kid and they would race to read it and they'd take it to school and show their friends. And then, I'd see on the news, there's like 5,000 people at midnight trying to get an 800-page Harry Potter book. And I know that when I did the book for Scholastic, they invited me to do the National Book Festival in Washington, D.C. And I went out with the author of 0 Degree Zombies on Patrick Henry Bass, and we went on first. And, we had maybe 50 people in the audience. And then we look up after we go off, and now there's like 200 girls clutching Smile and Drama and Sisters because Raina Telgemeier is coming. Like, who the heck is Raina Telgemeier? And they're just hugging the book. And then she leaves and then replaced by 330-year-old men hugging the Scott Pilgrim book. And then he goes up and it's like, this book changed my life. On page 42 when Scott Pilgrim said, blah, blah. I'm like, holy moly. And then after that, Jeff Smith, who did Bone. And I was like, this is what I want to do, because these people, I could not believe the emotion that they had. And I'm like, again, as important as it is to have books about Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, it's not the same where you're going to get a kid that hugs the book and reads it before going to bed and wakes up reading it and, gives it to his friends. I'm like, we needed a Black Greg Heffley from Wimpy Kid, a Percy Jackson. And that's what I set out to do, is like an iconic African-American character that a Black kid can look at and say, this is me. And a white kid could look at and be like, hey, I was a New Kid. That's me too. Because I had white kids tag me in tweets going, I am Jordan Banks. I'm like, well, go ahead. A little girl from New Zealand talking about I am Jordan Banks. It's like, that gives me goosebumps, because you don't see Black characters make that leap into mainstream like what Fat Albert did for my generation. there's been like nothing. I guess like Doc McStuffins,
Yeah.
Maybe, but there is no, um, something like that where it's a black character that has that kind of reach and builds that kind of compassion and empathy and things like that. And that was what my goal was. And because it took me so long to find a publisher, and I didn't think that anyone would ever publish that. So I had given up on being traditionally published, and that's why I just did it on my own for so long, because I wasn't going to do a misery book.
And what's fantastic about the response of the readers that you described is like you predicted it with the book's dedication to the Jordan Banks and all of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what's next for Jerry Craft? Are you currently working on a project that you can talk about?
I am literally, as we are speaking now, working on New Kid Part 2.
Really?
Yep. So
HarperCollins, that's fantastic.
HarperCollins has signed me for a book 2 and a book 3.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. So that will be the next several years of my life. I just got an email from my editor yesterday saying, okay, so we're going to have this completely done by November, right? Like November 2019 or November 2020. So I'm already working around the clock to meet my deadline of November 2019 to hand it in so that it can launch in fall of 2020. It will be called Class Act, and it will have the same characters that you know and hopefully love.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
Yep. So I'm already like down to, I eat on Mondays, I go to the bathroom on Wednesday, and any other time I'm at the drawing table, except for when my 2 beagles jump on me and I have to, stop to rub some bellies for a couple minutes.
I can understand that.
Yeah.
Well, I should let you get back to your drawing board. Thank you so much for taking time away from it to talk with me. As I said, New Kid is just so important. People really need to read it and to think about the issues it raises because, man, it's going to provoke a lot of important conversations.
Well, thank you, first of all. Thank you. And I see more books on the horizon like that with kids who are just kids. My buddy Eric Velasquez has a book called Octopus Stew coming out in the fall that is just, an Afro-Latino kid with his amazing imagination. And I was privy to see like an advanced copy and just absolutely love it. So I'm starting to see more things like that where it's kids just being kids. And I think it's going to have just a huge impact on us all. So thank you, Sean. SEAN.
And thank you for noticing.
Yeah, you got it.
I want to thank Jerry again for taking time to talk with me. If you haven't read his graphic novel, New Kid, you should definitely check it out. It's a fun book. And I have a feeling you're going to see it on some award lists in the months to come. That brings us to the end of this month's episode of The Storyteller's Thread. I look forward to seeing you back here next month when we'll continue to talk about the craft of storytelling. Till then, happy reading.